I'm David Smith. I'm director of the Kuyers Institute for Christian Teaching and Learning at Calvin University, and this is the third of 3 videos in which I'm trying to introduce a little of what the Kuyers Institute's about, what we're interested in, what we try to do through our projects. And in the first video I talked about our research focus, some of our research projects and our conference and journal. In the second one I was talking about our curriculum work and how we try to put out concept examples of different approaches to designing teaching resources. And in this third video I want to focus on teachers themselves and the ways in which we're interested in trying to help teachers to learn. So I started my career a while back as a secondary school teacher in England, and I trained as a language teacher, and I was teaching German and French in secondary schools. And a few years before I became a teacher, I became a Christian. And I remember in my early years of teaching, I was struggling quite intensely with the relationship between those two events, becoming a Christian and becoming a teacher, because I did have the sense that having become a Christian, that I hadn't just signed up for a Sunday hobby or a new social circle, that this was something that was supposed to reshape me. It was love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul and strength. And it wasn't just something that I could keep for the religious bits of my life. And I lived a lot of my life in school. And yet, as a language teacher, I wasn't teaching Bible, I wasn't teaching philosophy, I wasn't teaching English Lit. I wasn't teaching the kind of subject where I could spend a lot of my time in class discussing what we believe about the world or whether God exists or these kind of, these big question things. And so it felt like it was difficult to find the interface. What did my being Christian have to do with my being a teacher, other than maybe just trying to be nice to my students, which, well, my colleagues were trying to be nice to their students as well, or bringing up Bible verses in places where they had nothing to do with what we were talking about. So didn't really want to go down the path of being weird for the sake of being Christian. So out of this started a learning process for me, and it wasn't until I started connecting with other Christian teachers, started reading things that had already been thought recently and further in the past, that I started finding pathways into a more complex, more nuanced relationship between my faith and what I was doing in the classroom. I started realizing that a lot of my teaching and learning materials in language classes were very consumer focused, where there were a lot of dialogues about shopping in France and Germany, going on vacations, talking about what we did at the weekend. And I started wondering, should I change the pictures that I used? Did I have too many pictures that were cartoons of Germans going shopping and not enough pictures of Germans that might awaken some empathy or help students to see them as human beings? Should I change the material we talked about in dialogues in classrooms? Were there ways of talking about things other than shopping and hobbies in simple language? And so slowly this started to reshape the way I thought about designing my classroom, and it turned over time into a lot of larger scale curriculum work. But originally the struggle was how to find a subtle interface between my faith as a Christian and the work that I did in classrooms. And I found over time that a lot of teachers are in that same space of looking for ways to get a better fit between those parts of their identity. A few years back, I was talking to a science teacher here in the Midwest of the United States, and he told me at the start of the conversation, he said, I've been to Christian conferences, I've read books. He said, I want to be a Christian teacher. I want to have a Christian worldview. I want my faith to affect what I do. You don't need to persuade me of that all over again. I've been to the conference, I've worn the t-shirt, I'm on board. And he paused and he sighed and he said, but most of the time I'm really just teaching photosynthesis. And as we talked and unpacked that a little, it seemed that his sense was that the times when he got to be Christian were the times when he got to say something about Christian truth in public and have a discussion with someone. So he got to be Christian when he brought up questions of origins or the meaning of life, or whether people are reducible to their brains. But the rest of the time he was just teaching science that everybody agreed about, how leaves work. And there wasn't a chance to stand up and make a Christian point out of the things that he was teaching. So I said to him, well, okay, for the sake of argument, let's say this strategy you've got of trying to raise Christian concerns, that only works, 10% of the time in your classroom. Let's think about some other ways faith might relate to science teaching. What about the aesthetics of your classroom? Does anything in your classroom help students to see creation as beautiful and something to be approached with wonder, and not just as a source of information or of raw materials. What about the relationships that are shaped around lab work in your classroom? How do you teach students to support each other, to seek each other's success, to learn to draw on each other's gifts? How does that happen in your classroom? What about the ethics of how science develops into technology? Do you ever talk about that in class? How about the kinds of virtues that are necessary for laboratory work, the kind of patience that's necessary for care with equipment, the intellectual humility that's needed to look at your results and not superimpose your expectations? How do those virtues develop, and is there anything in the way you teach that helps those virtues to develop among your students? And other things too. We just talked about these different ways in which Christian virtues, Christian ideas about relationships and community, a Christian sense of wonder at the world might inform the way he went about teaching science. And what stayed with me out of this conversation was the way at the end of it he sat back and he said, you know, I never thought about it that way before. And I thought, here's a teacher who's been teaching for a number of years, and he's got this one strategy for relating his faith to the way that he teaches. And he's got one bridge to drive all of the traffic over, and the bridge won't take all of the traffic. And there's just a lot more going on that he could be tapping into that could actually make him more excited about his work as a teacher, more excited about his life as a Christian, and potentially make him more fruitful in his educational work and do good for his students. So as well as conducting first order research, trying to turn that into curriculum projects, we also try to create learning opportunities for teachers, workshops, seminars, webinars, online resources, videos like these, trying to find ways of creating learning opportunities so that teachers can get a more nuanced sense of how they might be able to be Christian in their classrooms in ways that serve the needs of their students and creatively develop the possibilities of their teaching.